This explained why they might look as though they were changing size, and why they sometimes even changed direction. Unfortunately, that still didn't fit all the facts. It didn't easily explain why the planets appear to speed up and slow down. So, rather desperately, Ptolemy fudged his model further by moving the Earth away from the centre of the deferent and having the deferent rotate around an arbitrary point in space, the equant. But now, the works of astronomers like al-Battani started to strain Ptolemy's ideas to breaking point. Their careful observations began to suggest that even with Ptolemy's unwieldy equants and deferents, the actual behaviour of the heavens didn't fit the data.
So what do you do if you were an astronomer living in Baghdad and you have all those results on your table? The very first requirement is to say, this Greek tradition is not as trustworthy as it is advertised to be. And now, of course, they begin to say, if the fundamental values of the astronomical tradition of the Greeks, which we could double check and we found them to be in error, what else is in error? They began to question now the more basic foundational astronomical, cosmological foundations of the Greek tradition.
And question they did. What's absolutely striking about the writings of Islamic scholars by the 9th century is the increasing use of the word shukuk, which in English means doubts. They show that it's sometimes necessary to doubt an idea that everyone around you believes unquestioningly. Islamic doubting of Greek astronomy began the slow process of undermining the notion that the Earth is at the centre of the universe. To doubt takes great courage and imagination. But if the great dialogue between Islamic and European astronomers shows anything, it's that doubt, or shukuk, is the engine that drives science forward. One of the first great shukuk scientists was called Ibn al-Haytham. He was born in the Iraqi city of Basra in 965 AD and was among the first to argue passionately that scientific ideas are only valid if they're mathematically consistent and reflect reality. And when he applied his fierce, rigorous intelligence to Greek astronomy, he immediately spotted that there was a fundamental contradiction at its heart. On the one hand, Greek cosmology argued that everything in the heavens revolves around the Earth. On the other hand, Ptolemy, in his Almagest, argued that if you want to mathematically predict how the sun and planets move, you have to pretend that they go around an arbitrary point in space, the so-called equant. This is clearly a contradiction. The heavens can't both go around the Earth and not go around it at the same time. Ibn al-Haytham hated this nonsensical contradiction. In the early 11th century, he wrote a paper, Al-Shukuk ala Ptolemaios, or Doubts on Ptolemy. In it, he writes with barely contained frustration, Ptolemy assumes an arrangement that cannot exist.
Ibn al-Haytham says that is a total absurdity. We cannot accept that, and furthermore, he says, it's not a slip of a tongue. Ptolemy knew that it was an absurdity, and he shows us where Ptolemy himself was embarrassed by having to introduce it. So he says there is a fundamental reasoning problem, meaning that the Greeks knew, that Ptolemy knew that he was making a mistake, but he knew he couldn't do any better, and hence now the challenge is to do one notch better, and hence to be able to fix this. That, in my explanation, begins to be the program of research for all astronomers to come.
In order to achieve that project, you had to be convinced that it was possible to make high precision mathematical models of the way in which planets and stars move that would really capture how they are in the heavens.
Ibn al-Haytham, in effect, laid down the challenge for all astronomers who followed, which was to come up with an explanation for how the heavens move that is both mathematically consistent and agrees with what we observe. The final answer to this would come from faraway Europe with Copernicus and others, but the next and crucial breakthrough came somewhat closer. The top of this mountain in northern Iran was the adopted home of the man who was the next of Copernicus's Islamic influences, Nasr ad-Din al-Tusi. He would succeed in rewriting Ptolemy's theory, which would ultimately lead to the overthrow of the geocentric view of the universe, and so the birth of the modern scientific age. This is the remote castle of Alamut, al-Tusi's adopted home. For many years, it was the home of a Muslim sect called the Ismailis. It's a lovely secluded spot, and it was the center of the Ismaili movement. It's not surprising that al-Tusi would find a home here. And it wasn't just him. Many other scholars were gathered here, and there seems to have been a library. It was a center for learning as well as a military stronghold.
Here, this is the main gate, northern gate of the upper castle of Hassan Sabba.
A new archaeological dig is now revealing under the castle, hewn into the living rock, a warren of rooms and studies, a mosque and living quarters for this extraordinary community of soldiers and scientists.
This is the court of mosque or center of headquarter of castle.
And it was within these cramped conditions that al-Tusi started his masterwork of the shukuk, or the doubts, the tadhkira. In it, he finds an answer to Ibn al-Haytham's first challenge: how to eliminate Ptolemy's equant. Instead of a sphere rotating around an arbitrary point in space, al-Tusi devised a series of two nested circles, which rotate around each other in such a way that they eliminate the equant. The nested circles became known as a Tusi couple. This is the mathematical system that finds its way into Copernicus's work some 300 years later. Having found a solution to the equant problem, al-Tusi now wanted to complete the task Ibn al-Haytham had started 200 years earlier, to find a consistent mathematical description of the movement of the celestial bodies. But to do that, he needed better data, which meant bigger and better equipment than he was ever going to find here at Alamut. And then something happened which changed al-Tusi's life forever. The Mongols. Streaming in from the east, an army of Mongols, led by Haluga Khan, marched into Iran, crushing everything before them. By 1255, they had reached the foothills of Alamut, intent on its destruction. Then, in a brilliant piece of diplomacy, al-Tusi managed to both save his own skin and satisfy his scientific ambition. He visited the Mongol leader and played on his deep astrological superstition. Convincing him he could tell the future if only he had new equipment, al-Tusi persuaded the Khan to make him his head scientist and to build him just a few hundred miles away, perched on a hilltop where the air was clear, the largest observatory the world had ever seen. This is all that remains of the Maraga Observatory. The main instrument is hidden under this protective dome. Al-Tusi's new astronomical center was based around a single large building. Inside was an enormous metal arc, an armillary arm, 10 meters across. On its circumference were marked angles in degrees and minutes. The scientists would line up the celestial object under study with a central point on the arc, and then make a reading from the markings on the arc, giving them the definitive, accurate position of the object in the sky. The building was also surrounded by smaller astronomical equipment, libraries, offices and accommodation. The observatory even had its own dedicated mosque.
I suppose it is a little disappointing that there's not that much left of the place now. So you really have to imagine what it must have been like back in its heyday. After all, what Al-Tusi built here was nothing less than the world's greatest observatory for 300 years. And like any modern-day international research institute, he brought together the world's greatest astronomers from as far away as Morocco and even China. I mean, it must have been a really great, buzzing atmosphere to work here.
With his new observatory and world-class team, Al-Tusi was now ready to fulfill Ibn al-Haytham's dream, to try to make Ptolemy's model scientifically rigorous. First, they attacked the mathematics. As well as the Tusi couple, they invented other systems of planetary movement. And with these new systems, they were able to calculate mathematically consistent models for many of the celestial bodies. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the Sun and Moon.
Al-Tusi and the astronomers he brought together created what became known as the Maraga Revolution, which was a complete paradigm shift in astronomy, overthrowing the old Ptolemaic view.
What Islamic scholars and astronomers like Al-Tusi do is to organize and make sense of mathematical astronomy at a level of unprecedented accuracy, using instruments more precise than had been built before, over longer timescales, with predictions of the positions of planets and stars that no one had previously reached. That at Maraga or at Alamut, we see, I think, genuine revolutions in the level, scale and intensity of mathematical astronomy.
But there was still a problem. The new models were mathematically coherent, and they dispensed with Ptolemy's unwieldy equant. But they still firmly placed the Earth at the center of the universe, and that inevitably meant that their descriptions of the heavens were intricate and complicated, with epicycles, deferents and couples. It was like some great cosmic gearbox. It would require a huge leap of imagination to make the next step in our story. And that next step would take place 2,000 miles from where I am now.
In my view, the last phase of the Maraga Revolution took place not in Iran or anywhere in the Islamic Empire, but here in northern Italy. Based on the work of Muslim scholars, places like the University of Padua were already starting a new scientific movement, the Renaissance.
Back in Padua, where I began my journey, I now understand why Islamic astronomers were so important to Copernicus. They gave him his motivation. He's the first European to share Ibn al-Haytham's deep aversion to Ptolemy's cosmology. And that's what makes Copernicus not the first great astronomer of a new European tradition, but the last of the Islamic tradition.
This is the second edition.
As we've seen, many of the complex mathematical models Copernicus uses in his new heliocentric model, like the Tusi couple, are copied from Islamic astronomers. But more importantly, it's Copernicus's deep desire to bring mathematical consistency to cosmology that he really owes to his Islamic predecessors. Copernicus's ideas set in motion a train of scientific revelations that would eventually lead to Isaac Newton and the discovery of gravity. In Newton's hands, Ibn al-Haytham's dream of an astronomy with rigorous and coherent mathematics, which agrees with experimental observation, finally took place. But this begs two crucial questions. Why was the great astronomical project which Islamic astronomers began completed in Europe and not in the Middle East? And how did knowledge of Islamic science get to Europe in the first place? The answers to these questions lie in one of the most beautiful cities on earth, the Queen of the Adriatic, Venice. Venice was founded on a swamp off the coast of Italy and felt itself separate from Europe and not bound by its laws and traditions. And as Shakespeare famously pointed out, the two most important aspects of Venice were its merchants and its long-standing links with the Arabs or Moors. It was a rich and complicated relationship, sometimes based on piracy and theft.
The story goes that in 828, two Venetian merchants stole the bones of a famous Christian saint from Venice's rival city across the water, Alexandria. The bones belonged to St. Mark the Evangelist, and they brought them back here to St. Mark's Square.
But without doubt, trade with the East brought to Venice great wealth and an exchange of ideas, customs and people, as Venice expert Vera Costantini showed me.
So this is called Campo dei Mori because, as you can see, at the corners there are statues of what were called Moors.
Yeah. Oh, there's another.
Yeah, there's another one with a turban. The beard was recommended to Venetian merchants even when they went to the East. There were manuals written for Venetian merchants.
How to blend in.
How to, yes, you know, how to be respected in the East.
Yeah. Oh.
As Venetians traded more and more with their Muslim neighbours, the influence of Islam was more strongly felt. Arabic coffee culture became hugely popular, as did Islamic styles of architecture with their characteristic arches and decorations.
So the next thing I want to show you is the Palace of the Camel. When Venetians traded in the East, the unity of measurement of a load that could be loaded on a dromedary was called a carico. And it was the exactly same unity of measurement they had in the East, and it was called yoke.
So it's not coincidence that they...
No, it's not,
That they actually imported that unit of weight.
Yes, of measurement, yeah.